Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm Chief Knowledge Broker for OCTO, Open Communications for the Ocean. And I'd like to welcome you here today, today's webinar on recent developments in the sustainable management of marine resources with Mike Elliott, who's Director of the International Estuarine and Coastal Specialists, IECS Limited, and Emeritus Professor at the School of Environmental and Life Sciences at the University of Hull. Um, Mike, thank you for being with us. And Mike had some thunderstorms earlier today or last night, and so it's we're thinking his internet is back up and running again. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that everything works smoothly. But we're very glad you could be here with us, Mike, to present on this. And before I turn it over to Mike, I just wanted to let everyone know how they can ask questions. There's two ways to ask questions. You can use the question panel in the user interface, and that sends the questions directly to me and I can see them and moderate them. It's a little easier to moderate the questions in that format, but we also have the chat, and the chat is available for you to share either things directly with just Mike and I, just me, or with everyone. We welcome you to use the chat for communicating with everyone in the webinar, as long as it's on the topic. You can share things you know, you can ask questions that way in case you want input from others who are participating. So we encourage you to use the chat, just use it, keep it on the topic, and keep it used professional. So you can also put in questions that way if you're interested in questions from other people as well as Mike. But either way, both of those work for sending in questions. I'll be monitoring both. Mike will give his presentation first, and then we'll go to Q&A. We'll have some dedicated time for Q&A at the end. And
Hi, Sarah. You've frozen.
turn it over to you now, Mike.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, you froze for a while, but let's
Okay.
go for it. Um, okay. Wherever you are, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. It's great to be with you. As Sarah mentioned, I have two positions. One is a director of a private research company in the UK, and the other one is an emeritus professor. I was at the University of Hull for many years, and now I'm an emeritus professor. And as far as I can see, and being an emeritus professor means the university can take credit for everything you do, but they don't have to pay you anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a set of ideas that I guess we've all been working on for the last few years. And I'll give you references and I'll tell you where the material comes from. But if anyone wants the presentation, I'm very happy to give it to you. And as Sarah mentioned, this is being recorded as well. So we'll go from there. A lot of the work is it's things I've been doing with two very good friends and very good colleagues, Ankel Borja in Spain, Roland Cormier in Canada, and I'll mention some of the papers we've been doing there. And these are them. So we have had a set of papers in the last year or two, all about sustainably managing marine resources, and I'll refer to these. I'll also refer to a lot of, now many of you are from outside Europe, but I'll refer to a lot of European projects that are going on at the moment. In IECS, we're involved in 5 of these, and I'll mention them as we go through, but there is a lot of them, and there's a huge amount of really excellent research and marine management coming out of these, but we'll see there and that. So let's start off, and I'll try and take you through, why we need to bring in marine management, what we're doing in marine management, where the science comes in, and so on, and then take you through, say, some of the ideas and concepts. So there are a lot of concepts in this, but I say you don't have to take notes. You're very welcome to have the presentation afterwards, especially if some of you need these to in your teaching. I'm more than happy with that. So really, there's only one idea in marine science and management. That is, how do we maintain and protect the ecological structure and functioning while at the same time allowing the system to produce ecosystem services from which we derive benefits? that's the jargon, and I'll explain as we go through it. In other words, as it says at the bottom, the big idea is we have to look after the natural stuff and we have to deliver the human stuff. Why do we have to do this? As you see on the left-hand side there, we have to cope with historical problems. We have to cope with endangered functions. We have legal systems. We want economic prosperity. And of course, we have to cope with climate change. And we do this within two very large ideas. One is called the ecosystem approach, and as an approach, it is an overall system. It's a way of looking at the system. And I guess all our countries have signed up to the ecosystem approach, and you can read it there about what it is. In essence, it's an approach for looking at the system to do what I said just now. In order to operationalize the ecosystem, we use something called EBM, ecosystem-based management. So it's a way we manage systems. It's a way we bring all the aspects together, and that's what I want to talk to you about: the way we bring those ideas together. And I'll try and go through these. And of course, within those, we've got lots of ideas, we've got lots of principles, we've got lots of tools and so on. These are the recognized principles of ecosystem-based management, and we have tools to go with all of those. And in some of the projects we're involved in, like the one that's mentioned there, Just4Cs and Marbefes and so on, we are deriving tools or using tools in order to put these principles into operation. So you see many of them, and I'm going to touch on many of these there. We think about what we do in the marine environment according to, at the highest level, according to various activity sectors. And this diagram was done by one of my very good colleagues, Gemma Smith. These are the activity sectors that we have, and many of you will recognize these. So these are all the overall sectors we have in the marine environment. For those of you in Europe, some of these link to Marine Strategy Framework Directive themes, but in essence, these are all the things that we're concerned about worldwide. Now, we've been using an overall framework for a while now, and it's a framework, it started off in the 1990s with something called, well, it was called PSI, looking at pressures, states and impacts. And then it became DIPSIR. And then more recently, the last 10 years or so, or 12 years, it's become what we call DAPSIWORM. I used to be a benthic biologist working on marine worms, and so DAPSIWORM fits quite nicely. In essence, this relates to, we've got a set of drivers, our societal basic needs, and I'm going to explain these in a minute. From those societal basic needs, we carry out activities. The activities give us pressures, which are a mechanism of change. They change the natural system, what we call the state change. And that then leads to impacts on us, impacts on human welfare. And so we bring in responses for that. So it's a very basic, very simple system, but it's fundamental to the way we manage the marine system. And I'll try and explain these ideas. The basic human needs are very simple. You know, what do we want from the environment? What do we want from all of our environments? And these were derived from Maslow's hierarchy, but there are other ways that there are other systems we've used, but Maslow seems to show these quite nicely. The idea that you start off fulfilling your basic physiological needs, you know, we need food and oxygen and water and so on. And eventually we move through these in order to give us our more spiritual, with a small s, or ethereal aspects. And this is where we're getting enjoyment and health and welfare. So we want the marine system to give us all those. How do we get them? We carry out all of these activities. As you see, we've got lots of activities, and I'll show you later how we break these down. Those activities lead to pressures, and a pressure is what we call, a pressure is the mechanism of change due to those activities. So we have these pressures that occur in an area. All of these occur within one area, but also we have pressures that come from outside an area, And this is notably things like climate change. So all these are pressures that they occur from outside an area. So the causes of these pressures are globally, but the consequences are locally. Oh, and we can think about this in terms of hazards and risk. And a while ago, we developed a hazard and risk typology, and it's been featured in various publications. And then this latest chapter here that I've done with, again, another very good friend, Mike Kennish at Rutgers, where we've tried to synthesize a lot of this information. And this has just come out in the second edition of the treatise on estuarine and coastal sciences. But as you see here, we've got a set of hazards. Some of these are natural. For example, a tsunami is natural. Cliff failures are natural, but some of them we make worse by our actions. So, for example, a tsunami is a natural event, but if we remove the mangroves that are protecting the coast, the tsunami makes things even gets even worse than that. So then we've got a set of natural hazards, and we've got a set of human hazards like sewage or non-indigenous species or fishing and so on. These hazards that they become a risk when they affect something that we value. This is to put it in, if you think of all your coastal areas that you're close to, you could actually list those endogenic things, those local pressures that are developed by what's in the area, and also these exogenic pressures, things coming from outside. You can do this, and it's quite easy. And I suspect that this list here probably goes for most areas that you're linked to there now. And we summarized this again with a very good friend, Omar De Feo in Uruguay. We summarized this relating to coasts as the triple whammy. A whammy is like a punch of something. That we said, well, estuaries and coasts are affected by these three things. One is increased industrialization and urbanization. One is the increased use of physical and biological resources. And then the third one is decreased resistance and resilience to things like climate change. And we'd done a review, and we looked at this worldwide. So now let's look at the complex nature of the marine system and everything we do in that area. This is a map that we produced quite 20 years ago now. I think this map came out, but it shows all the activities within one sea area. This happens to be the Irish Sea between Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But it shows everything that's happening. So it's useful for us to think about these managing marine areas in this, let's call it this stylized system here. And it happens to be there's two countries with a dividing line down the middle, and there's a whole load of things that are happening in those areas. We have navigation and wind farms and oil and gas and fisheries and biotechnology and agriculture and so on. So we have all those. Now, what we have to think about is each of these activities occur in a certain time and space, and they occur what we called a while ago, we call them footprints. We have an activity footprint where something occurs, and that's usually the bit that's licensed. That leads to a pressures footprint. That leads to effects footprints on the natural and the human system. And we need a management response footprint as well. And I say this has all been published, but I'll explain that. So this is that diagram. This is showing the activity footprint. And as you see, some of these are relatively small. You know, a fishing might be a track that goes through an area. A wind farm might be a few points where the wind turbine sits on the seabed and a cable route. So the activity footprint might not be that big. And you can see this. This is an illustration, a very simple illustration of dredging in an area, seabed dredging. And the dredging area, the activity, is really just the width of this, this drag head that you see there. Because we're dealing with a dynamic system, that activity leads to a larger amount of pressures areas. So now these areas are getting bigger because the pressures that are developing from those activities are even wider. So for example, that dredger, it goes across the seabed. This is a very small activity, but if you see the amount of overflow and turbidity plumes it creates, the disturbance and so on, you'll now see how the pressures that these create, the pressures footprint is getting bigger and bigger. And of course, the effects from that get even bigger because you might have disturbance of the seabed in one area that liberates pollutants, and those pollutants get transported, or fish come and feeding this area and they transport the pollutants. So the effects footprints are even bigger. And then, of course, it gets even larger when we have things like mass migrations of cetaceans through an area, or say seabirds through an area. And then on the top of this, we can put on this the things like protected areas there. And occasionally I've tried to calculate the effects of those activity, the size of those activity footprints. And this is just an example here showing some figures of areas that are occupied by those activities. And this is really to illustrate the fact that it's quite difficult calculating the activity footprint. So calculating the pressures and the effects footprints is even more difficult, but we can come back to that if we want there. Now let's look at the way this dipsy or the dapsy worm framework builds up, and I'm going to use an example of decommissioning an operation of offshore oil and gas and offshore wind. We started looking at the way this system builds up, and particularly the drivers that we have, which is how to improve the seas to remove the activity. So we have the basic activities from oil and gas. We then lead to a management decision of what are we going to do about this, whether it's in the North Sea or off Thailand or in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm afraid I still call it the Gulf of Mexico, no matter what name I'm told by various people to call it. So removing these or doing something with them. And as you see, the activities of even removing platforms, they get bigger and bigger. So this shows you the complexity of it. And then as you go from all of those activities to all the pressures, it's getting more and more complicated. But there is only a finite number of marine components that we're affected by that those activities and those pressures. And that's what we're worried about. Are we going to try and protect these? Are we going to try and protect them not only for the natural system, but for the human system? And then are we going to do something about it? So you can see how it's easy to build up this system, even in complex system. Here's another example. This is some work I'm doing with a good friend, Ida-Marie Hasselhoff in Chalmers in Sweden, where we've been looking at the shipping activities and their footprints. And this is from one of her former papers, showing the different activities due to shipping. And we can describe all of those activities, all those pressures in these diagrams, what we call, it's a conceptual model. We've been calling them horrendograms for a while, but it shows the links. So a lesson for all of us is, if you're starting to look at all of these problems, start with a good conceptual model, and then you can start interrogating that model there. Now we can say, how do we manage those? And what we're trying to do is manage two aspects of an area. One is what we call the assimilative capacity, and one is the carrying capacity. The assimilative capacity used to be just related to contaminants, but now we talk about the assimilative capacity of a body of water to assimilate various activities. How can we have activities without it affecting the body of water? And the same with carrying capacity. We used to just think about it in biological terms, the amount of biota that is in the area, how can we support that? Now we're thinking about the ability of a body of water to support a given amount of activities. So you see these have come together, and I'll explain that. And this is a model we're using in Just4Seas, one of the European projects, where we have an area and there's no activities in it. So it's got high environmental quality. We put in some activities and we lose that environmental quality. We put in mitigation measures and we regain some of that environmental quality. Then something else comes along, more renewables, and we lose some. Oh, sorry. There. And we lose some more assimilative capacity. We gain a bit with mitigation, and we keep going down until we get to a stage, this green line here, as an area we don't want to go past. What we call, we're passing from good environmental status up here to less good environmental status. So management is trying to ensure that we can have all of these activities there, and yet not go into this this bad area, as we could call it, there and that there. So a challenge for all of this is assessing those risks that I mentioned earlier. So assessing the risks and managing the risks, trying to work out what are the risks and then how do we something about it. And for a while now, we've been working using a certain model, and it started, it was a model that came from industry, but for the last 15, 18 years or so, I've been working with Roland Cormier in Canada, where we've been using this, what was originally an industry model, and we've been using it on an environment. And it's called a bow tie analysis. And that, like any bow tie that you know, it has a central knot, an ecosystem event that you don't really want to happen. And we know they've got a set of causes of that, these blue boxes. And if the ecosystem event happens, we'll have a set of consequences. So what we have to do is we have to put in prevention between the cause and the event, and then we have to put in mitigation and recovery between the event and the consequences. And as you see at the bottom, this fits in with the DAPSA framework. The causes come from our drivers, our activities, and our pressures. Our state change and impact on welfare are our problem we're worried about and the consequences. And then the responses with management come into these prevention controls and mitigation controls. And we've used this. This can be used in many areas. There's some work I was doing, that work that Darrell Burden led on, where we were looking at the effects of offshore of climate change on offshore wind farms. So you see, it gets quite complicated. What we've been doing in one of the, or in a couple of these European projects, is using bow tie analysis to look at the problems that we're concerned about. This happens to be from marine plan to do with conservation designations, and it's saying, what are we worried about in our failure to satisfy conservation? So we're having all these activities, all these pressures that are going to give us a loss of conservation designations. And if that happens, we've got lots of consequences. So we put in prevention and mitigation measures. And you can do this fairly easily. You can do this just in PowerPoint, and we can even give you the instructions on how to do this and that there. So then we need the framework for tackling these problems. We identify the problems, we identify all these activities, these drivers, these risks, and so on, and we can create our bow ties with these. But I haven't got time to go into that. So the biggest challenge we have is measuring change due to all those activities and all those pressures. So we carry out monitoring. We do the monitoring, we observe and we check these over time. Now, if you can just keep in your mind that monitoring is not management, it's not a management measure, but it's a tool that tells you what management measures you should have and whether or not the management is going to work there and that. We've got lots of types of monitoring, and these are all the types of monitoring that I know that have been mentioned in various bits of legislation or various agreements. And as you see, there's a lot of these. And if you want me, we can discuss this, so I can give you more information about these. We summarized a lot of these in a book that we wrote for managers of coastal industries and that. When we carry out monitoring and then we use indicators to see that change, we need to make sure that our monitoring is good, our indicators are good, and we use what are called smart indicators. Indicators and the results of monitoring that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time dependent. So you see, we need good monitoring, and we need that monitoring to link into management. I say monitoring isn't management. Monitoring is telling you what management to do. Going back to the Dapsy worm, you can see here I've just given you an indicator, an indication of the indicators for each of these elements. We have indicators of activities, indicators of pressures, indicators of state change on the natural system, indicators of impacts on human welfare, and indicators of responses. So we can say, yes, we are doing something there. So the next thing is how we manage all of those activities together. And one of the biggest ideas at the moment is on cumulative pressures. It's easy to work out the effects of, say, dredging, or the effects of fishing, or the effects of wind farm and so on. But what happens when you put all of these together, and this is one of the biggest challenges we've got at the moment, is how do we bring together ideas to look at all this? And in Guest for Seas, that's one of the things we're doing there. So the aim of cumulative impacts, or in combination impacts and effects assessment, is to try and look at all those together. And this is what is needed in all the sea areas of the world, because all sea areas have got lots of activities and they've got lots of pressures. Now let's go back to, okay, so how are we going to manage all of these things? What management can we bring in? Well, these lines down here are all the basic recognized policies that have been adopted by our countries worldwide. And if you look at any UN booklets or books, you'll see these. I'm one of the editors of the World Ocean Assessment, and the World Ocean Assessment 1 and 2, we're now writing 3, were written according to a set of principles like this. So then we say, okay, where do we bring the solutions from to bring this management? And for a while now, we've been working out management according to a set of 10 things. So these 10 things are things that you have to do in order to get successful management. You need the ecology to be sustainable, so we have to bring in actions for that. We need the right technology. We need to make sure our actions are right for the economy. We need it to do what society either desires or even tolerates. So, for example, society might desire clean water, but actually it tolerates putting sewage into the sea. We need the right sort of laws, the right sort of people to carry out those laws. We need the politics to get in line, and I'm not going to start going into politics because we've all got problems with our politicians. We need our actions to relate to the ethics and morals. We need all the cultures to be involved, and we need to be able to communicate all this. And a paper that I'm working on at the moment with Ankel Borker and Roland Cormier is using this model here that shows the way we bring all of those 10 things together, but also the overlaps between them, and the way that some of those, like culture and ethics and social desirability and politics, is qualitative, where some of these others are quantitative. And I say all this fits in within an ecosystem-based approach, which leads to ecosystem-based management, which leads to ecosystem-based technical measures. But as I say, this we're hoping this paper will be submitted in this next week or so. The next thing is, well, where are we managing? Well, I've already mentioned this. We're managing everything from a small area of the activity footprint through whole areas and whole catchments right up to the globe. So we need marine systems and marine management to do all of those. And that. How are we managing it? Well, we're managing it by having everything. We have management actions, we have programs of measures, we have indicators, we have lots of management bodies, and I'll try and explain all of these and that. This is what we call a horendogram. Actually, the paper was called the ultimate horendogram. This is a mind map of all the marine legislation. This happens to be for Europe, but we've now got this for other countries as well outside Europe. What it shows is in the middle, these are all international agreements, and then you have regional agreements. And in this case, these red boxes are European ones, and then these green boxes are national laws that allow that. And all countries have this system going from the global out to the local. And we can think about this in terms of getting vertical integration of this legislation going from the global to the local or the local to the global. So we need that vertical integration, and also we need horizontal integration. We need to make sure we can manage the fisheries, the navigation, the recreation, the aquaculture, all of these at the same time. So we need all of these. And to say we can give you instructions on how to draw these if you want to do it for your area. Say it's getting more and more useful there and that. This brings it into a spatial dimension there. This shows the way in Europe we have the various bits of legislation that go from the land to the sea, but I shan't mention those now. So we've got all that legislation. The next thing is who is doing the management of it. And we have now not just a horendogram, we have an organogram. And this shows how we create the marine management. This happens to show how we go from the national level through all the ministries and then the agencies and so on. And again, you can draw this up for any of your countries, showing that. So we have in all countries, we have lots of government departments, all with a marine competency. And then this leads to lots of agencies that they relate to. And this is a generic list. If you think about all your countries, you will see that marine comes into all of these, even in defense and transport and culture and so on. So the marine field comes into all of those. So we started thinking about how do all of these link together, all of these different bodies, and what do those different bodies do? And again, this is a generic system. You can apply this to your country, know sort of what is needed to be done and who does it. So I was talking earlier about footprints. And so we started thinking about the management response footprint. What is the footprint of our management there? And this again was published a couple of years ago. Oops, sorry. This was published a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, showing all the way from the very local level. We have technical measures that may cover just parts of a hectare. So, for example, an environmental impact assessment. We have marine plans that go bigger. Then we go to national environmental policies, then regional environmental agreements, such as the Oslo and Paris Agreement, or HELCOM, or the Nairobi Convention, and so on. And then up to the global size. And you see there where we're going, the footprint of this management is getting bigger and bigger. In the paper, we give the converse of this, which shows the how many agreements we've got in each one of those. So now you get the impression we've got vertical management, but within each of these levels, we have horizontal management, because in each of these levels, there is navigation, there's fisheries, there's recreation, there's marine shipping and so on there. Just, I'm going to run out of time, so just very quickly, I talk about a couple of examples of marine legislation, and this is two European directives that are also being used outside Europe. One is called the Marine Strategy Directive, which is part about how to maintain and protect ecological structure and functioning, and it relates to a whole set of or 11 descriptors. And then we have another directive called Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, which is there all about how to plan the seas in order to get what society wants. So fulfilling this big idea, how to protect and maintain the natural stuff and deliver the human stuff. I shan't go into that because that's just on how we implement these. So then we start planning the marine space. And we've got lots of assessments that we do according to those marine spaces. And this is going from the very small area, the environmental impact assessment, through regional assessments and statutory assessments, all the way up to global ocean health. So you can see how we are building up, we are thinking local, but having to, or acting local, but actually thinking global in all this. So we're having to go out from this. And the problem is that no, marine management as it is, we create lots of designations, we have lots of management areas and so on. And with Eva Amorim in IECS that works with me, we've just submitted a paper where we're trying to look at the overlap between all of these designations there and that. Okay, so let's go on and say where the problems are in all this. One of the problems is we have to manage across boundaries. We have to manage areas according to whether they are connected in some way, which is connectivity. We have to manage areas using the same ideas in different areas, the same policies, what we call coherence. And then we might not have the same policies in different areas, but we want the same output, and that's what we call equivalence. And we again published this a couple of years ago. And we can look at this connectivity, coherence, equivalence in different ways, but I'll gloss over that because I want to get into other things there. Many of you have been thinking about ecosystem services and societal goods and benefits for a long time, especially ecosystem services. And what we've been thinking about recently is how we use these terms and whether we're making it more complicated than it should be. And the system that I've been using for a while now is trying to split ecosystem services from societal goods and benefits. The system has its own natural capital, the ecology has its own natural capital, and it has ecosystem services within that. It provisions and it regulates and so on. Eventually, that system produces materials that we want to use. But we can't use them on their own. We have to do something to use them. We have to put in complementary capital and human assets. So the system can produce fish, but we have to learn how to catch the fish and process the fish and cook the fish and so on. And from that, we get societal goods and benefits. So this framework simplifies it. I think it simplifies it by separating ecosystem services from the human domain, the societal goods and benefits. This is why we talk about cultural goods and benefits. We don't talk about cultural services, but you can read about this there. What we've been doing now is trying to value that system, and the valuing of that system starts off with ecological valuation of this natural system, the socio-ecological value evaluation of it, and then the socio-economic value. And this is what we're doing within Marbefes. And interestingly, if you're talking to politicians, they're interested in the socio-economic valuation rather than these other ones. So you have to remember who you're talking to and that there. So we start having these recipes. What information do we need and how do we get them? And so we start then thinking about, we're dealing with a system. the whole thing is a system. So let's go into the social scientists and let's start using systems analysis. And several of the people in IECS are working on systems analysis. Gemma Smith with John Atkins and Amanda Gregory. Amanda is a systems analyst expert there. So we started looking at systems analysis. And the systems analysis starts off fairly simple. It's saying, take a marine area. What are your priorities for that area? And can we set those? That's A. Now go and get the information for that. Go and get the natural information, the social information, and so on. Let's go and do the monitoring and the surveys. And then C is using that information. Now, in the paper that we did, it got rather more complicated by that, but that's because there was a set of subsystems in that. But it's quite a logical system. What do you want to do? A, now go and get the data to do it. B, now use the data. C. And this has been taken further by ourselves, especially led by Gemma Smith, looking at integrated systems analysis, and the papers that's just come out on the way all of this come together. So in here you see the way the system and DAPSIWORM is all coming together. That there. Okay, let's now bring all this together. We start off using this simple, we're looking after the ecology and we're trying to present what society wants there. So we have this central spine going from developing the ecosystem to it producing its own services that it needs. We then put in complementary capital and assets and we get out our benefits. And we do this because we've got these basic human needs, these drivers. The drivers, our basic human needs, we carry out activities, we put things in, we get the benefits, it satisfies our drivers. The only problem is that those activities give us pressures. They start messing up the system. So they cause degradation on the natural system and they cause degradation on the human system. And if we're not careful, that degradation gets worse. The system's gone grey. So we do something. These things I've been talking about. We bring in policies, we bring in laws and so on. We bring those in and hopefully we turn the grey bit back to this nice system in the middle. We satisfy the ecology, we satisfy the socioeconomic, and everybody's happy. So then the most recent work we started doing is, yes, well, we can do all those, but how do we know we're successful at them? And the paper that's just come out in Ocean and Coastal Management with Ankel and Roland was looking at how do we measure success in marine management? And you can read all these later, but what we tried to do is determine what are the measures of success? How do we know we've got success? What are the time spans of getting success and so on? And can we measure it in delivering the human system and protecting the natural system? And a few more where we'd said, if you have to resort to legal proceedings, so if you have to fine a company, or even in Europe, you have to fine a country for not following this, then you've failed in your management. So what we're saying is, can we look at success in all of this? And we've got various ledgers. These are the last of this. So we need to say, not only can we do all this stuff, but how do we know when we've found success in it? And this is the model that we then produced, that we said success is when we have a vision for an area, a sea area, and we've satisfied that vision. We've had objectives and we've met those objectives. We've carried out actions, we've got those. We've produced outputs and we've produced those. And we know what our outcomes are and we've achieved those. And by the time we've done all that, we know we've fulfilled our vision. So by doing all this is simple, what's called a planning cycle, but looking at this in the marine area, we know that we can relate to all this and that then. The final couple of slides are are really to make the point that I've been talking about a lot of things that are done at local scales. But because we want to protect the whole oceans, we're now having to think about large systems. And this is a group I'm involved in. GASAMP is a global group. One of the work packages, work groups we're on is looking at how we use the seas or how we stop using the seas, if need be, for climate change. Oh, we use the seas to try and stop climate change. And we've recently produced this report where we're trying to say how can we use the seas or how can we measure the ability of the seas to offset climate change, and what are the measures of it and that. So you can read all those. And then a paper that has now just been submitted with Uncle Borcher and many of the rest of us. We were looking at the way scientists involve or get involved in policy, and where the links are. So many of you may be in this block here. You're scientists. You are there to give advice. You may be giving advice to non-governmental advisors or government advisors. That might get to policy people implementing them and policymakers, and eventually all of this relates to the politicians coming through this way. Or you may be in the field where you're dealing with politicians who say, we want to do something in the sea, and then you go the yellow arrows there onto how does that politician, how does the policymaker and the policy implementer get the background information, and they come back to the scientists. So what we're trying to say in this is, what is the role of these different bodies? And hopefully you can put your role in based in all of this. Okay, the last slide with any text on it. So the challenges. Let's start off with good objectives. Ecosystem-based approach. It's a spelling mistake there. Ecosystem-based management and ecosystem-based techniques there. Base the management on good science, and I hope that's what many of you are working on. Do we know these footprints, and do we know this risk and assessment and management system? I didn't talk about the opportunities, but it's the same system. We know that the system functions because of connectivity. We need to collect the data, and we use the data collected. We need to determine if the management is working. We need good concepts and tools. We're now working out how we value this, because many, certainly the politicians, will only respond to valuation. And so we need to harmonize the government of all this. And then we need to go through and use the systems analysis, because we are working on systems. So I think that was rather a quick rush through it, but you're very welcome to take the presentation and use it and read it. And if you have queries, get back in touch with me. I think Sarah's recorded this, so you can go back and look at any bits that I went over too quickly. But hopefully that was useful. But I also, I especially hope that you can relate that to the marine areas that you're working on. And I'll stop there. That's
Hey, thank you, Mike. This is great. I felt like I was back in graduate school. Lots of learning.
good.
All right. Um, so I would just remind everyone, you can send in your questions either through the chat panel or the question and answer. Um, getting lots of compliments in the chat, Mike.
Great. Good.
Lots of appreciation. Um, so a question that came in, and now this was sort of midstream when the question came in, was, to what extent can marine conservation challenges be fully resolved when appropriate control and mitigation measures are implemented? For instance, if stringent pollution control regulations and habitat restoration programs are effectively enforced, what is the likelihood that issues such as coral reef degradation and marine species decline can be entirely mitigated?
Very nice question. I don't know how to give it. That's a great question. I think it's a lecture on its own. I don't know how. I hope many of you have seen the new David Attenborough film, The New Ocean. that was made for the World Ocean Conference a few weeks ago. In that, he gives some really nice examples where exactly what the question is saying is working, where we have done things, where we are controlling things, we are controlling fishing and so on, and so we are mitigating many of those problems. But the essence is, um, we're good at controlling the local things, what I call the endogenic pressures. No, we know the problems of dredging, we know the problems of fishing in an area. It's the global problems we're having trouble with, and obviously the global problems require global controls. So no matter what we do at the local scheme, it's the global systems that we have to work with, and many of those we have got good success stories. I didn't have a chance to go into a lot of restoration work, but there are some really good, and we've done a lot of work on how we do restore systems and stop them degrading in the first place, sort of thing. So we have got those. Those of you, this actually might have been behind the question. Those of you watching the David Attenborough film. There's one bit I thought it was great, but there's one bit that I disagreed with, and he seemed to suggest that by stopping overfishing, we will stop coral reef bleaching. And now I know that this wasn't the film isn't designed for professors of marine biology, but I think it was a bit misleading him doing that sort of thing. So just be careful with it. So overfishing is one problem, but climate change is a huge problem and needs global solutions.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. And I haven't seen it yet, so I'm looking forward to watching it with my kids
Okay.
on vacation. Yes. All right. Um, there's sort of question statement from Sybil. Um, sure, there were major differences between visions, aim, outcomes, etc., between the fossil oil industries and the other sectors, fisheries, shipping, tourism, etc., with all their sets of scientists. How do you give a chance to conservation, even an agreement across sectors on the baseline data and indicators?
That's again a nice question, Sybil. Um, when I put up that slide at the beginning about sectors, um, it's globally accepted that I think there are 11 sectors. I usually forget whether it's 10 or 11 sectors, and these are sort of mineral extraction and navigation and so on. Now, I don't know whether you counted up, but we've put an extra sector in there. We've put a sector called conservation and restoration, because what we're saying is that that is an activity in itself that we need. And sort of conservation and restoration is as big a sector, as important a sector as all those others that we've got there. Now, the problem we have in it, and this might be in Sybil's question, is that very often with marine management, it's who shouts loudest. And up to now, we've always had the oil and gas shouting very loud, and fishing shouts even louder. We talk about fishing punching above its weight, when in fact in many countries, certainly in Europe, fishing is quite a small sector now, but it's a very noisy sector. So what we're needing is all of these to be brought together. And when I said about the 10 tenets, what we call the 10 tenets, the essence of that is trying to make sure you get all 10 things working okay. So you can't just base it on the economy. You have to base it on culture and morals and ethics, things like that. And we're gradually getting there. But as Sarah and I've talked about before, I think sometimes it's two steps forward and one step back. And actually, in some places, it's one step forward and two steps back. But we see there. So we do have it. I've often said I think we have all the right ideas, we have the right tools, we have the right approaches. The biggest challenge now is actually getting those to work.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Um, let's see. Another question that came in. Mike, do you think that looking at the multiple and cumulative effects of the multiple pressures on the natural systems will increase or decrease complexity of the organograms and horindograms?
I think as we've all seen, they are increasing them, They have to increase them. And as I mentioned, Sarah, the I think we're pretty good now at working out what is the effect of a single activity. If someone phones me and says, "What is the effect of dredging in this area?" I can tell them. No, they can describe the area, and I'll tell them what the effects are. Multiple, the cumulative effects or in combination effects, that's the big challenge. And what we're doing is we've got various systems doing that or looking at those. The problem is they're all additive. If you've got five activities in an area, we'll say all the cumulative effects are five. But actually, they're not. They may be much more than five because you've added things together. You've got synergistic effects and so on. Or they may be less than five. No, the effects of dredging and the effects of bottom trawling may be the same. So we're getting better at it, but I think this is one of the biggest challenge, not only to know what cumulative effects we've got, but to weight those cumulative effects, to actually say, how do you put them all together and how do you give them the right proportion? The other problem is that when people look at cumulative effects, what they do is they add up the activities in an area. But an activity is not the same, as I tried to show. It's not the same as a pressure. It's not the same as an effect. A pressure and an effect are bigger than an activity. So just adding up the number of activities in an area isn't the same. And there are papers where people have said, no, human impacts in an area, and they've told you what the human activities are. That's not the same as human pressures and human effects, but we're getting there. I mean, I'm an optimist. I have to be. The In order to be in order to do what we're doing, I think we're gradually getting there, but we're still not there yet. And what we're doing is we're looking for much better methods of dealing with all of these cumulative effects. In essence, putting those. This is why the horendograms and the bow tie diagrams, they're getting more and more complicated. But it's a complicated system. Oh, by the way, that horrendogram I showed you of all the legislation, when we use that, we use it in two ways. One is if I want to show a politician, and that diagram's been used in our parliament, if I want to show a politician how complicated things are, I'll show them the whole thing. If I want to help them work through a problem, I only show them a little bit. I'll show them one part and then I'll show them the next part. And before they know it, I've shown them all of it. But actually, I've only shown them bits at a time.
Device. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Quick question. We still have two more questions I'd love to get to. But there's been lots of requests for the presentation itself. Would you be okay if we posted that as a PDF alongside the recording?
Yeah, that's no problem at
Okay.
all. Go for it. And if I always say if someone wants to use it, then go ahead. If you want to use it in teaching, I mind you, I also say if you get paid for using it, then I want some of the money as well. But
Fair enough.
no, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm not precious about these things.
Okay, great. So just wanted to let everyone know I've posted a couple times the link where you'll find the recording. You'll need to scroll down on that page. But we'll also post the PowerPoint presentation there too. Okay. So a couple more questions. Um, oh, several more. Okay. Well, starting with this one. Thank you for the excellent presentation, especially the logic and comprehensive interconnectivity of your models and systems work. I suppose many of the models have generic application. At the same time, do you have thoughts on any special issues for the high seas in the context of your concepts and systems approach? And how do you envision implementation across countries and international players?
Yep.
Also, are you thinking about a future paper specific to the high seas and BB&J? Thanks so much.
That's great. Yeah, yeah, there's many things within that. Certainly, yes, many of the ones they are generic and we are using them. We're transporting them to many areas. So for example, I mentioned, we can give you a set of instruction on doing bow tie diagrams or a set of instructions on Dapsy worm or whatever, where you can apply them to many areas. The socio-ecological system that I mentioned that Gemma Smith and the others have been working on, and we've all been working on, the paper just came out in sustainability. then that is now a generic system. And the aim is to create a system that can be transferred and can be used. Now, when you go to the high seas, I was working on one bit of, we were doing one bit of work. We were looking at how the legislation that we've got, say within Europe, can translate to the high seas. And many of it can do. The, the, in many cases, the basic ideas are the same. How do we protect the system? That report I mentioned from GESAMP, what we're doing there is looking at how someone decides they want to, say, pump carbon dioxide down into the sea, or how they want to sink algal mats, or use iron fertilization. And all of these are out in the high seas. But using that system, you can take those, for example, you take those 10 tenets and you can apply those to the high seas. We know we've got the moral aspects of deep sea mining, we've got the economic aspects and the technology, and all of those can do it. And so we do constrain some of our ideas by talking about the 12-mile limit or the 200 nautical mile limit. But many of the ideas and concepts, they are transferable to ABNJs and BBNJs. So it's a question of just really the way you think about all these.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Are you still okay for staying on for a couple
Yeah,
more
sure.
questions?
Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah.
I know some people have already had to hop off, and for anyone else who does, thank you so much for coming and for being here. But for those of you who can stay, we'll get to a couple more questions. Um, there's a question from Matt. Are there any useful ecosystem model approaches for assessing this complexity for informing resource use actions beyond single sector focused models like fisheries models?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that, and you got there before me. Most of it is single sector. There are models for offshore wind, there are models for navigation and so on. And as you say, the best ones are single sector, like fisheries. Things like sort of Marksan or the Atlantis model, some of these end-to-end models where you go from, what is the environment like to what can we get out of it, and that there. People are working about it sort of with EcoPath and EcoWin and so on, and starting to bring those together. And indeed, in one of the projects we're in Guest for Seas, we are, and in Marine Plan, we are starting to look at these models, how you go across these, but they're not very good. It's so complicated, and I think as many of you saw, we're very good at the conceptual level, but when you start trying to parameterize those, trying to have numerical methods. So, for example, the bow tie analysis, one project we did a few years ago, series project, we took it from the conceptual to the quantitative using Bayesian belief network analysis. And you can do that if you've got the data. But again, that was for the effects of climate change on fisheries. So it was still sectoral, but it happened to have climate change and agriculture based on it and that. So we're gradually getting there, but you see, every meeting I go to, people keep telling me, "Oh, well, in that case, AI is going to solve all of our problems with this." But of course, AI can only do what it can find on the online sort of thing. It's regurgitating what we put there, but it may be better at linking all of these aspects together. So we may get there. No, actually, we will get there. But again, we'll get there qualitatively and then later on quantitatively. And then we'll have industry saying, well, can I take decisions based on qualitative assessments? Say, well, an expert judgment, and say, well, that might be what you have to do until we get better and better models.
Okay, thank you, Mike. A question from Ibrahim. Let's see. Many thanks to Professor Elliott. My question is related to the classification of ecosystem services. The standard, is it CICES,
Yep.
defines three sections: provisioning, regulation and maintenance, and cultural. What does Professor Elliott think about this cultural section? As he said in the presentation, that we can't talk about cultural ecosystem services, but cultural benefits.
Exactly, and that Ibrahim was the main point that I was trying to make. That for so long we've been putting everything together as ecosystem services, and we're saying that the ecosystem can produce these services. Now, provisioning becomes a bit of a problem because yes, the ecosystem can produce fish, but we have to do something to get that fish and use it. We have to go out and catch it. We have to build boats and harbors and everything else for it in there. We have to learn how to cook it. We have to build restaurants and so on. So we can turn the natural ecosystem service, but into a societal goods and benefit. We can do it. Now, when it comes to culture, if you read things like the basics, CICES is changing a bit, but not as much as I want it to do. I would say that the natural system doesn't know culture. The natural system doesn't know that a polychaete is any different from a blue whale. It's only when we come along and we give a different value to a blue whale than a polychaete worm, for example. But we have to do something. The fact that we think a polychaete is less important than a blue whale is because we have put we're a sentinel being, a sentient being. We've put our values on it. So we have done something. The natural system doesn't know that's a nice seascape. It knows it's a seascape. It doesn't know that's a nice mountain. It just knows it's a mountain. It's when we come along and say, that's a nice seascape, that's a nice mountain. We have put something into the system. We've put our knowledge, our skills, our time, our money, our energy. We've put those in, and we have turned an ecosystem service. It's produced fish into a societal goods and benefit, or it's produced a normal fish. We put something into it and we say, oh, that's a nice looking fish, or we'll use it as a curio or whatever. So that's why I'm trying to get over the point that if you think about ecosystem services, that's in the natural domain because that's the way the system works. By the time it comes to provisions for us, benefits for us, then it's a societal goods and benefit. Now, there are some people will go along with that, but some of the ecosystem services people, they won't go. They want to push everything into this term called ecosystem services. And I think by doing that, I think we're confusing things. I think if you split them, ecosystem services in the natural domain, societal goods and benefits in the human domain, I think now it's easier to deal with, and it's easier to explain it to politicians because they're the ones that are interested in the societal goods and benefits. You know, what's in it for us? And that's what most people think about. So we have to protect the natural stuff, but really it's getting those out. So I hope, Ibrahim, I hope that explains it. But you're right in that CICES and some of the others, they will still think in everything as an ecosystem service. I'm not sure. I don't think the logic holds, but people will tell me my logic's wrong. But whatever, that's what science is.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Keep getting more questions. Let's see. Uh, in order to have a complete marine spatial plan, do you agree to include the whole watershed for a particular coastal zone from the area you are working on?
That's a really interesting point. In Europe, we have various directives, like the Water Framework Directive, which takes a whole. I use the word catchment rather than watershed, but the catchment is a whole of the basin there, and that. So it has a whole catchment basis to it. So if you're managing an estuary, for example, you have to manage the whole catchment, and you also have to manage what's coming in from the sea. Now, it then comes down to where do you stop? So if you have, say, marine protected areas on the coast, of course that is affected by what happens in the catchment. And so you need catchment management. One of the reasons why people complain about marine protected areas, they call them paper parks. That is, they're being created in, you've drawn a line around a map sort of thing, and you're doing there. Now, what we're wanting is, we don't want to just protect that area. We want to protect the whole system, which is why in Europe we have a thing called the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is aiming for good environmental status of all the seas. And you can argue that if you get good environmental status throughout the whole sea, you don't need a marine protected area, because everywhere is in good enough status. You still need to be able to use it because we still want to eat fish and so on. But can we manage the whole system? Whereas putting things in these little pockets, as people say, yeah, we could stop things in one area, but the sea is affected from outside. I think some of this is a leftover from land spatial planning, where you can manage an oak forest easily. You can manage a grassland easily, because you don't have to worry as much about what happens from outside. Whereas the sea, you can't. It's so dynamic. You have to manage what's outside of an area as well as what's inside an area. So yeah, you just in passing, Sarah, the reason I talk about catchments and watersheds is in our school geography lessons. There's not many things you learn well, there's quite a few things you learn in school geography, but one of them is what is the difference between a catchment and a watershed? And a watershed is a line, and a catchment is an area. But in parts of the world, especially North America, they use watershed for all
Yeah,
of
I
it,
was
sort
going
of
to say
thing.
we do here
So
in the US.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so I just have to make a translation in my mind, something's there. So that's good.
Okay. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
last
just
one.
go for it.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. All right. This is from Alberto. Hi, Michael. Thanks for an inspiring talk. As an early career scientist, your comment on how science that garners support and attention is based often on who shouts the loudest really hit home. In your experience, what do you think the scientific community can do to truly collaborate and not say compete, especially during heavy political times and when lives are in danger? What
Mm.
does the identity of the scientific community become?
Oh, that's again, I think we might need that would be a great discussion topic, sort of thing there. Um, I take the view, not only a scientist, no, we're not only scientists, we're also members of society. We have to get involved. If we don't get involved, then people will do what they want to do. Now, I think there's a difference, Sarah, between Europe and North America. In North America, I have a lot of good friends who are more willing to enter the public debate. Now, it may be they're getting stifled. Actually, some of them are leaving because of the political debate, which is very worrying. And there, but I always think they're more willing to get involved. Whereas sometimes I get an impression in Europe where what we do is we're willing to present our data. We're saying, here's our information, here's our data. Now go away and do something with it. We're less involved. Some of us get involved in political debate and so on. So I take the view we are. There is a thing we published a long time ago now called the stakeholder typology. And in that stakeholder typology, there's one group called influencers. And we are influencers. So are NGOs, so are politicians. We're influencers, try and do something there. So we have to get involved. And there is some good, I mentioned Gemma Smith earlier. Well, Gemma is looking after an early career researchers network. And one of the things they're doing, I think they've just submitted a paper on how early career researchers can get involved in the political debate and how they can have their say. If you want Gemma's details, just email me and I'll let you know, sort of thing there. But there are ways where we're saying just get involved. Now, our politics is getting very dangerous at the moment. I mean, yeah, you don't have to tell me in certain countries where science is derided. We had this with the stupidity of Brexit. The scientists we weren't listened to. about what's going to happen to it and that. And it became slogans and everything, and exactly the same as in the US and many other countries now. But all we can do is we can get involved. And at the end, if they don't do it, we say, well, we told you so. But let's not get to there. Let's get involved. And that's all we can do there. But also, as a final comment, Sarah, I also have to take the view, if I tell society that what they're doing is wrong in the sea and is doing damage, but society still decides they want to do it, I have to say, yeah, society has the right to, excuse the language, to screw up the environment if that's what they want. I can tell them it's not a good idea. I can tell them that overfishing will sooner or later affect our welfare because there won't be any fish there. But if they want to do it, then society has to be given the freedom. This is what democracy is, unless you have a command and control political system that occur in certain parts of the world. But no, just get involved. Yes, some bits shout louder, but but there are more and more initiatives which are stakeholder led. You bring together all the stakeholders to do things.
Mike, thank you so much. This was amazing. So many compliments in the
That's
chat.
great.
And yes, we really, really appreciate you sharing this with us. We've all it was great to think at this level, and I think people have told you some specifics about how this is going to be really useful for their work. So thank you again.
That's great.
And thank you to everyone who
My
attended, and
pleasure.
thank you for sticking with the last 15 minutes to get the last bits of wisdom coming from Mike. And I'll be in touch with you shortly after so we can get the presentation posted on the website for others to share. But thank you again. Mike,
That's
we
great.
so appreciate your time, and we so appreciate everyone who gave their time too to come and share in this. And we hope to see you on future webinars.
That's great. Many thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
That's
All
good.
right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.